The underworld of Glasgow has long been shaped by violent rivalries and ruthless power struggles. Criminal empires, such as those led by the Lyons and the Daniels families, thrived in the chaos that followed the decline of heavy industry, filling the economic vacuum left behind. This era saw figures like James Jasper McCann emerge, men whose reputation for violence and intimidation cemented their standing in Scotland's criminal hierarchy. Welcome back to Crime Chronicles. Today we will look at James Jasper McCann, one of Scotland's most notorious gangland enforcers, and the horrific torture he inflicted on a victim that would finally put him behind bars for a good stretch. McCann's rise to power was marked by strategic alliances with some of Glasgow's most feared gangsters. His ties to infamous enforcer Paul Ferris granted him both protection and insight into the brutal mechanics of organised crime. Stories of McCann's calculated and ruthless enforcement tactics spread fear across the city, earning him the respect and terror of both allies and rivals. Unlike many enforcers driven by rage, McCann operated with cold precision, ensuring maximum terror with minimal risk to himself. His association with Tam the licensee McGraw further expanded his influence. Known for his business acumen and ability to straddle both the criminal and legitimate worlds, McGraw found in McCann a valuable asset. By the late 1990s, McCann was a name whispered in fear amongst Glasgow's criminals. His reputation led to high-profile assignments for the Daniels clan, Scotland's most powerful organised crime family, where he became a feared enforcer specialising in debt collection and intimidation tactics. McCann's preferred weapon was a knife rather than a gun, ensuring his victims were left alive long enough to spread fear. His reputation grew to such an extent that major criminals in Glasgow and Edinburgh reportedly treaded carefully whenever his name was mentioned. Despite multiple arrests and charges, including 2 brutal knife attacks in the 2010s, McCann repeatedly escaped conviction, as terrified witnesses refused to testify against him. One of the most notorious incidents linked to McCann was the daylight attack on George "Goofy" Doherty, a member of the Lyons clan. In a meticulously planned assault, McCann ambushed Doherty with a knife before a car ran over the victim multiple times to ensure his death. Despite Doherty wearing a stab-proof vest, he stood no chance against the brutal precision of the attack. While authorities strongly suspected McCann's involvement, no definitive evidence connected him to the murder. However, it was the events of October 21st of 2017 that exposed the true extent of McCann's cruelty. The victim, Paul Connor, was an unassuming man who had recently received a compensation payout of £6,600 for injuries sustained in a car accident while he was a passenger in the car of Robert McCann, James McCann's brother. Although no legal obligation existed for Connor to share the money, Robert believed he was entitled to a portion. This perceived slight set off a horrific chain of events that would leave Connor physically and psychologically scarred for life. Connor was lured to a flat in Shettleston, Glasgow, where he walked into an ambush. The McCann brothers, alongside their associate Greg Bannerman, were waiting. The confrontation began with Robert demanding a share of Connor's money, but when Connor refused, Robert struck him with a claw hammer, escalating the attack. James McCann, known for his sadistic methods, joined in, ensuring Connor's suffering reached its peak. The torture that followed was beyond comprehension. The assailants took turns beating and interrogating Connor, demanding the PIN to his bank account. To increase the humiliation, Paul Connor had been stripped naked. The attackers brandished a syringe filled with an unknown substance, threatening to inject him with heroin to simulate an overdose. The torment was relentless, designed to break Connor's spirit. At one point, James McCann ordered a pillowcase ominously suggesting it would be used to cover Connor's face, signalling their intent to kill him. A woman present in the flat reportedly hid in a corner, weeping as she listened to the horror unfold. But the ordeal did not end there. Unsatisfied with the suffering inflicted, the attackers decided to move Connor to another location in Lawlor, Edinburgh. He was bundled into a car and transported like a hostage, uncertain of whether he would make it out alive. Upon arriving at the second location, the violence resumed with even greater intensity, if that was even possible. Paul Connor continued to be beaten, hit with a hammer, and choked with a length of wire. In a desperate bid to survive, Connor saw an opportunity and leapt from the first floor window, landing heavily but thankfully still alive. Disoriented and injured, he managed to flag down a passerby who helped him contact the authorities. His escape was an act of extraordinary bravery, given the trauma he had endured and the inevitable fear of retaliation. The police investigation that followed uncovered the full extent of Connor's suffering. Photographs taken shortly after his escape revealed deep bruises, cuts, and ligature marks from the wires that bound him. While his physical wounds would heal, the psychological scars were far deeper. Connor later testified that he lived in constant fear, unable to go outside without looking over his shoulder. The terror instilled by the McCann brothers did not dissipate with their arrests. It became a permanent fixture in Paul Connor's life. The trial at the High Court in Glasgow saw all three perpetrators face charges of assault and robbery. The harrowing details of their crimes were laid bare before the jury. James McCann received an 8-year prison sentence, Robert McCann 7 years, and Greg Bannerman 4 years. The judge also imposed an additional 2 years of supervision on Bannerman upon his release, acknowledging his role in the horrific events despite his claims of walking away when things got out of hand. Many questioned whether the sentences were proportionate to the crimes committed. The sheer brutality of the attack, coupled with the psychological torment inflicted upon Connor, led to widespread outrage that the punishment did not fit the severity of the crime. The fallout from the case extended beyond the courtroom. The McCann brothers' conviction marked a significant blow to their reputation as untouchable figures in Glasgow's underworld. While their sentences temporarily removed them from the streets, the scars they left, both on their victims and the communities they terrorized, would remain long after their prison terms ended. Paul Connor's ordeal stands as a grim testament to the unchecked brutality that thrives within the criminal underworld. His story is not just one of victimization, but also of resilience, of a man who endured unimaginable suffering, yet survived to tell his tale. However, the fear he lives with serves as a stark reminder of the lingering power that figures like James Jasper McCann wield, even from behind bars. Thankfully, karma has paid a visit to Jasper McCann while he has been in prison. Shortly after being transferred to HMP Shots, he was the victim of a brutal beating. Reports say he was slashed and battered with a pool cue, and although his injuries weren't bad enough to require a hospital trip, we're sure that quite a few people would have been happy to hear the news of the attack. Thank you for joining us today on Crime Chronicles. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel with your friends.